Zariah Tillman stepped off the jet bridge into the familiar hum of LAX, her heels clicking lightly against the polished terminal floor. The early morning sun filtered through the massive glass panes, casting long shadows that danced across the tiles as she moved with quiet confidence. Wearing a tailored cream blazer over a flowing navy jumpsuit, she looked every bit the poised professional. Her soft locks were pinned up in a neat chignon, and she rolled her carry-on behind her effortlessly. Most would assume she was a frequent flyer, perhaps a corporate executive or a diplomat's daughter. But to Officer Brent Mallory, stationed near the security checkpoint at Terminal 4, she was something else entirely. His eyes followed her movements with growing suspicion, his expression tightening as she approached the exit. To him, her confidence wasn't elegance. It was arrogance. The designer luggage, the perfect manicure, the relaxed posture, it all irked him. Mallory had been with airport security for over a decade, and he prided himself on his instincts, and his gut told him something about her was off. As Zariah passed him, he stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss. Random screening," he said curtly, blocking her path with an outstretched arm. Zariah stopped, blinking at him. "I've already been through customs and TSA," she said calmly, her tone neither defensive nor aggressive, just firm. "I understand," Mallory replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But we conduct random screenings post-arrival as well. Please step to the side." Several passers-by turned to look. Zariah glanced around, then back at the officer. "Is there a reason you picked me?" "It's random," he repeated, emphasizing the word like a period at the end of the sentence. Zariah raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't see you stop the man ahead of me, or the couple behind me." Mallory's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Her expression didn't waver. "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm simply asking for clarity. I have a first-class ticket, global entry, and TSA pre-check. I've done everything right, and yet I'm being randomly pulled aside." He gave her a tight, condescending smile. "You just don't strike me as the typical first-class passenger." The words hung in the air like smog. Zariah let out a slow breath, suppressing the urge to roll her eyes. This wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, but it never got easier. Her gaze sharpened. "Would you like to see my boarding pass again?" she asked. "No, that won't be necessary," he said. "Just step over here, please." Zariah hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Actually, I think I'll make a quick call first." Mallory's brows furrowed. "There's no need for that." But Zariah was already scrolling. One ring. Two. The call picked up. "Hey, Daddy," she said, her voice still composed but laced with cool undertone. "I just landed, but there's a situation." Mallory folded his arms, still confident in his authority, but there was a flicker of unease now. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to hang up the phone." She held up a finger, signaling him to wait. "No, not you," she said to her father. "I'm talking to a security officer who's decided I don't look like I belong in first class." There was a pause. Zariah could hear her father's breathing shift. "What's his name?" came the deep, composed voice through the speaker. Zariah turned to Mallory, who instinctively straightened his posture. "Name?" she asked him. He hesitated. "Officer Mallory." Her father's voice came again. "Tell him to wait there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Zariah ended the call and gave Mallory a thin smile. "My father's on his way. I'm not sure what you think that'll accomplish." Zariah raised her eyebrows. "You will be." 10 minutes later, a black car rolled up to the curbside access lane, an area reserved for high-level personnel and VIPs. Out stepped Reginald Tillman, a man whose presence turned heads. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit and aviator shades, he exuded power. People didn't just recognize him. They parted like the Red Sea when he walked, and Mallory's face drained of color as Reginald strode into the terminal with practiced ease, bypassing all security. Several uniformed staff nodded or stepped aside with hurried greetings. A terminal supervisor jogged behind him, phone in hand, whispering updates. Zariah stood calmly, arms folded, watching Mallory squirm. When Reginald reached them, he took off his sunglasses and looked the officer square in the eye. Is there a reason you detained my daughter? He asked quietly. Each word precise that Mallory's face drained of color as Reginald strode into the terminal with practiced ease, bypassing all security. Several uniformed staff nodded or stepped aside with hurried greetings. A terminal supervisor jogged behind him, phone in hand, whispering updates. Zariah stood calmly, arms folded, watching Mallory squirm. When Reginald reached them, he took off his sunglasses and looked the officer square in the eye. Is there a reason you detained my daughter? He asked quietly, each word precise. Mallory cleared his throat. Sir, it was a routine screening. Nothing personal. Reginald stepped closer. You told her she didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. Care to elaborate on what that profile looks like? Mallory stammered. I didn't mean, I just meant that, well, statistically speaking, Reginald interrupted. You stopped a young black woman who was minding her business, traveling with a legitimate first-class ticket, simply because you didn't think she looked the part. Mallory's mouth opened, but no words came out. Reginald turned to the terminal manager, who had finally caught up. I want a full report of this incident sent to my office by end of day. I also want Officer Mallory placed on administrative review immediately. The manager nodded rapidly. Of course, Mr. Tillman. We sincerely apologize. This doesn't reflect the values of our staff. Reginald glanced at his daughter. Zariah, are you okay? She gave a small nod. I'm fine, Daddy. He just needed to be reminded that he doesn't get to treat people like that without consequence. Reginald smiled faintly. Good. I raised you right. As the commotion around them swelled, whispers spread throughout the terminal. Several onlookers discreetly recorded the exchange on their phones. By the time Zariah and her father walked away, Mallory stood alone, staring at the floor, the weight of his actions sinking in. Back in the car, Zariah let out a long breath and stared out the window. This happens too often, she muttered. Reginald looked over at her. It does. But every time it does, we push back. We make noise. We hold people accountable. I just wanted to get home, she whispered. I know, sweetheart, he said, placing a hand on hers. But you handled it with grace. And you reminded him and everyone else watching that you're not to be underestimated. Zariah gave a half smile, her reflection blinking back at her in the tinted glass. She had come to expect these moments, these tests of her composure. But today, something felt different. Today, she'd stood her ground and the world had seen it. And tomorrow, if it happened again, she'd be ready. In the days that followed the confrontation at LAX, the video of Zariah Tillman standing firm against Officer Brett Mallory's biased scrutiny exploded across social media platforms. First, it appeared on a few smaller accounts. One person had captured the exchange on their phone and posted it with a caption, "She handled that like a queen. Know your worth, sis." By the next morning, it had racked up over 1 million views. Then came the media. News outlets quickly picked up the story, airing footage of the encounter with bold headlines. Airline heiress confronts racial profiling at LAX, and Zariah Tillman challenges airport authority in viral moment. National talk shows invited pundits to weigh in, and political commentators debated the broader implications of racial bias in law enforcement and travel security. Celebrities retweeted the clip with messages of support. Activists called for deeper accountability, and advocacy organizations like the ACLU and NAACP issued statements lauding Zariah's calm but firm stance. But amidst the whirlwind of media coverage and the buzzing notification of her phone lighting up with tags, mentions, and direct messages, what affected Zariah the most wasn't the fame or the praise. It was the deeply personal, vulnerable stories that strangers began to share with her. The messages poured in from all directions. Black travelers, men and women, old and young, reached out to thank her. One young mother wrote, "Your story made me cry. My 8-year-old son and I were pulled aside last month for additional screening. He asked me if we did something wrong. I didn't know how to explain that sometimes our skin is treated like a crime." Another came from a retired Air Force veteran who'd experienced years of random searches in uniform. "I served this country for 25 years, and still, they look at me like I don't belong." Zariah read every message, sometimes through tears, sometimes with clenched fists. The sheer volume of them stunned her. She had always known the reality of racial profiling intellectually, had experienced it in subtle ways, lingering glances, delayed service, unjustified suspicion. But now, she saw it laid bare in thousands of voices. Each story carried the same ache, the same quiet indignity of being presumed guilty, out of place, or fraudulent, just for existing while black. And yet, alongside the pain in these messages was something else. Gratitude. Empowerment. One woman wrote, "I usually stay quiet in situations like that, but after watching you, I stood up for myself at the airport yesterday. I kept thinking, Zariah wouldn't let this slide." Zariah didn't know how to respond to it all. She wasn't an activist, not in the formal sense. She hadn't set out to become a symbol. She just wanted to go home, to step off a flight, and live her life without interference. But now, that private desire had transformed into a very public moment, one she could no longer ignore. Her father, Reginald Tillman, had also received his share of attention. As the owner of the airline and a key investor in the terminal, reporters flooded his office for interviews. He declined most, offering only a carefully worded statement. "We stand against racial profiling in all its forms. What happened to my daughter is not just a personal affront. It reflects a systemic issue that demands reflection, reform, and accountability. We are working with airport authorities to review policies and implement measures that ensure this does not happen again to anyone." Privately, though, he sat with Zariah in the quiet of their Los Angeles estate and expressed his heartbreak in ways the press would never see. "I spent my life building a legacy," he told her one evening over dinner. "I want to make sure my family could walk into any room, any building, and be treated with dignity. But it doesn't matter how many zeros are in our bank accounts. To some people, we're still seen as a threat." Zariah nodded, swirling her fork absent-mindedly in a half-finished plate of risotto. "Money doesn't shield you from ignorance," she murmured. She began writing in a journal again, something she hadn't done since college. It helped her sort through the rush of emotions, the pride in standing her ground, the anger at Mallory's treatment, the weight of suddenly being a public figure. She even began drafting an op-ed, thinking she might publish it in one of the magazines that had reached out. But every time she reread it, it felt either too guarded or too raw. Her phone chimed constantly. A major news network requested an interview. A black student organization at UCLA invited her to speak at an upcoming panel. A civil rights conference wanted to feature her as a keynote guest. She turned most of them down. It wasn't that she didn't care. She cared deeply. But she needed time to process, to breathe, to understand what this moment meant not just for others, but for herself. Meanwhile, Officer Brent Mallory had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The public pressure was mounting. Protesters showed up outside the airport with signs that read, "Profiling is not random," and "Accountability now." An online petition calling for his termination had garnered over 250,000 signatures in a week. Some pushed back, claiming Mallory was just doing his job, that random screenings were an unfortunate but necessary part of security. But even those arguments began to falter as more incidents came to light. Other passengers at LAX, mostly people of color, sharing eerily similar stories involving the same officer. A pattern was emerging, one that even airport officials could no longer ignore. WestJet, the airline Zariah had flown with, issued a formal statement within the week. "We are deeply disturbed by the incident involving Ms. Zariah Tillman and are committed to ensuring all our passengers are treated with respect and fairness. Discrimination of any kind has no place in our operations, and we are reviewing all partnerships with security personnel to ensure alignment with our values." Still, Zariah kept a low profile. She attended therapy sessions, leaned on her close friends, and spent quiet evenings with her father. For all the public momentum, she was keenly aware of the emotional toll the encounter had taken on her. One afternoon, she visited a small bookstore in Leimert Park, seeking solace in the quiet company of pages. There, in the back aisle near the social justice section, she ran into a young teenage girl who shyly approached her. "You're Zariah Tillman, right?" the girl asked, clutching a copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Zariah smiled. I am. My mom showed me the video, the girl said. She said, "This is what grace looks like under pressure." I just wanted to say thank you. You made me feel proud. Zariah felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she replied softly. "That means more than you know." They chatted briefly, and as the girl walked away, Zariah realized something. It wasn't about becoming a symbol or making headlines. It was about moments like that, real, quiet, human connections that reminded people of their worth. That night, she reopened her journal and began a new entry. They tried to make me feel small, but in the process, they amplified voices I hadn't heard before, voices like mine. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us navigating systems that were never built to see us fully. I don't know where this path leads, but I do know one thing. I won't walk it quietly. In time, she would accept a few speaking engagements. She would finish that op-ed and see it published in The Atlantic. She would partner with legal advocacy groups to push for airport policy reforms. But for now, she would rest, heal, and honor the strength it took not just to stand her ground that day, but to carry the weight of what came after, because she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. In the quiet days that followed the media storm, after the news trucks had parked elsewhere and the hashtags had begun to fade from trending lists, Zariah found herself sitting on the edge of the infinity pool behind her father's Los Angeles home, legs dangling into the water, eyes locked on the skyline as dusk painted the sky in streaks of lavender and orange. The city below hummed with its usual intensity, but up here it felt distant, muted. She'd been quieter than usual lately, not out of fear or shame, but contemplation. The incident at LAX had become a flashpoint, a viral moment that thrust her unwillingly into a spotlight. But now that the moment was passing, she was left with questions, not about what happened. She knew the truth of that all too well, but about the deeper, unspoken systems that allowed it to happen again and again. That evening, she found her father on the veranda, sipping a glass of scotch, reading a leather-bound copy of The Souls of Black Folk. The sight of him there, relaxed, powerful, wise, brought her comfort, as it always had. "Daddy," she said, voice off, "why does this keep happening? To people like us? To people like me?" Reginald Tillman set down his glass slowly and looked at her. "Because some people mistake authority for permission," he said. "They think having power gives them the right to belittle, to control, to judge. But real power doesn't work that way." She furrowed her brow. "Then what happens when they meet someone who doesn't bow to it?" He smiled, not with joy, but with a seasoned kind of knowing. "They falter, because they're not used to resistance from someone they thought they could define." Zariah sat beside him, the weight of his words sinking in like anchors. "I didn't raise you to shrink," he continued. "And I didn't build what I built so we could be accepted. I did it so we could live free. But freedom," he added, his voice quieter now, "scares people who rely on control to feel important." That conversation lingered in her mind long after the sun had disappeared behind the hills. Later that night, curled up in bed with her laptop open, she wrote what would be her final public reflection on the incident. Not an essay or a press release, just a few carefully chosen words on her social media page. Dignity isn't something you earn from strangers. It's something you hold, no matter who's looking. The post went up without fanfare. No dramatic hashtags, no calls to action. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. She didn't expect it to resonate like it did. But within minutes, the comments came flooding in. Not just from supporters, but from people sharing stories, affirmations, and their own quiet declarations of worth. This made me cry. "Thank you for reminding me I don't need anyone else's approval to exist. I've struggled with this for years, always trying to prove I belong. Not anymore." Powerful. I needed to hear this today. Zariah leaned back in her bed and closed her eyes, overwhelmed but grounded. This wasn't about going viral anymore. It wasn't about Officer Mallory or airports or even her last name. This was about the fundamental human need to be seen. Not for what others assumed, but for who one truly is. The lesson, she realized, wasn't just hers to learn. It was hers to carry. As the days turned into weeks, she returned to the rhythm of her life slowly but deliberately. She visited her favorite cafe in Baldwin Hills, where the barista greeted her like an old friend. She volunteered at a local youth center in Inglewood, where she spoke not about fame or injustice, but about self-worth. She took long walks in the city, now sometimes recognized by strangers who stopped her, not for autographs or photos, but to say thank you or to share their own stories of resistance. The power of her words had reached far beyond the terminal walls of LAX. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, she still replayed the encounter in her mind. Mallory's sneer, the weight of being publicly doubted, the cold assumption that she didn't belong. There were moments when the strength she projected felt like a costume she couldn't take off. When the applause faded and the crowds thinned, what remained was a quiet, steady work of preserving her peace. In therapy, she unpacked layers of internalized pressure, the constant demand to prove herself, the fear of confirming others' prejudices if she ever let her guard down, the exhausting expectation that black women must be poised, articulate, unflinching, even in the face of injustice. Her therapist, a soft-spoken black woman in her 50s, reminded her of something profound during one session. "You don't have to be the symbol every day," she said. "It's okay to just be human, to feel, to rest." Zariah exhaled. The permission to be soft was a gift. One afternoon, she stood in front of a mirror, fixing the collar on a new blazer before an event. It wasn't a protest or press conference, but a scholarship gala for underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation and aerospace. Her father had invited her to speak briefly, not about the incident, but about leadership and legacy. As she adjusted her lapel, she caught her own gaze in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see someone who had to defend her dignity. She saw someone who had claimed it and who had learned how to carry it without apology. At the podium that evening, her words were simple but sincere. "People will try to make you question your place in the world," she said, looking out at the sea of young faces. "They'll ask you to shrink, to conform, to apologize for your brilliance. But remember this, your worth is not up for debate. Your dignity is not a reward. It is a right." The audience stood in ovation, not because she had gone viral, but because she had spoken something they knew in their bones. After the gala, a young man approached her in the lobby. He was a student pilot, barely 20, and had the same nervous energy she used to have before speaking in public. "I just want to say," he began, "that what you said, that dignity is something you hold. It changed how I see myself. I used to think I had to keep proving I deserved to be here. But now, I'm just going to focus on flying, on being great." Zariah smiled. "That's exactly what you should do." As he walked away, she felt something shift inside her. Not closure, because this journey wasn't about tying things up neatly, but peace, a sense of wholeness. The incident at LAX would always be part of her story, but it wouldn't define her. It wouldn't be the loudest part of her legacy. Instead, it would be a spark, one of many, that lit the path for others to walk tall, to refuse to shrink, and to remember that dignity, real dignity, doesn't need validation. It just needs to be lived. Because in the end, Zariah had learned what her father had always tried to teach her, not just with words, but with his life. That true power is quiet. True worth is unwavering. And the truest freedom of all is the freedom to be fully, unapologetically oneself.